Okay, so this is just another beautiful resource around food stuff. I can't tell you how frequently I have conversations with folks while doing the nervous system work around having consistent access to food and how difficult that really is for so many people. We have these very narrow definitions of what an eating disorder is or what disordered eating is. And outside of that, we tend to just act like it's normal to have such a stressful relationship with food and eating. But in our culture, it's super pervasive. And one of the things that is a regular part of my check-ins with folks that I'm working with is have there been any changes to appetite or to eating, or how are you doing in terms of getting consistent calories into your system? Because it is such a big deal to the nervous system. And I can't tell you how challenging it is for people and how um, significant there are so many significant parts that have a lot of really big feelings and concerns and fears around food. So I just love finding resources that validate how significant this experience is for so many people in a more inclusive way that doesn't just look at the very narrow group of people who maybe have fit a certain criteria. So I am going to share this beautiful article. And if you want to just go to the link in the description and skip my video description, you are fine to do that. It'll be there. So I found this on this wonderful website that is the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. This is where I was able to find the health at every size principles, which I really appreciate and am continuing to learn a lot from. And this is an article by someone named Danielle Grossman. And it's seeing eating disorders or any kind of difficult relationship with food as an active trauma, not a maladaptive coping strategy. So, if you've heard people talk about binge eating, bulimia, anorexia, or just disordered eating in general, they're typically lumped into these categories of like emotional eating, stuffing your feelings, or for people who are more restricting, it's about control, or that it's a self-harm by using food. And all of that puts the weight of the experience on the character or psychological well-being of the person who's experiencing them, which is just very blamey and does not recognize how much else is going on for folks. And how related to our nervous system, to our trauma, and to our the oppressive aspects of just being a person in our society is. And I really love this framing because they use the phrase eating disorder throughout this article. But what I really would like to add to this is that I consider not just someone who has an eating disorder, but anyone who has stress around food or eating is experiencing active trauma. Okay, because distress, and I love this sentence, distress around a fundamental survival need like eating means there's an activation of your nervous system into heightened survival mode many times a day. Okay, so that's falls under the category of chronic trauma, which is not surprising that many of us have more of like a complex PTSD type relationship with food. We want it, we feel scared about it, we feel sick if we eat, we feel sick if we don't eat. Many of us have digestive issues because of this. You know, our body's like, is it safe to digest this? You seem like you're really upset that you're eating it, or you haven't eaten a long time, you eat a lot, and then your digestive system's like, I was sort of shutting down and wasn't ready for this. All sorts of things. So, they name some of these beautiful range of stressors that can influence having stress around eating, lack of access, lack of consistent access to food. Something else I'd like to add to this framing is that epigenetics, our ancestral experience with food, is very present in our nervous system. And it could be that you had access to food growing up, but that perhaps your parents didn't. For example, neither of my parents had consistent access to food growing up. And then I grew up with a fair amount of, um, uh, you know, restriction around food in my home life. So there was plenty of food in the cupboard, but it wasn't necessarily celebrated for us to eat it. And then, for my actual parents, there wasn't food in the cupboard. And then for their parents, on one of the sides, one of the grandparents, super had like pretty abject poverty. So that's all in my cells. And so I personally have a lot of scarcity around food. I have um, much more food stored than I need. And I experience significant anxiety when I don't have like a food storage. It's not quite the level of having a bunker, but I have more food in the house than we need. And I get very stressed if I don't have that. And that was made worse for me during COVID. And so since COVID, I've just been real compassionate with those parts of me that want to store up food because there was it brought up all that fear. So I really want to acknowledge that this lack of consistent access to food is something that could be present because you experienced it in your lifetime, or it could be a more epigenetic or ancestral thing. And also, lack of consistent access to food is that word access is really important because they're pointing to like there may have been food in the house, but there may have been someone who was restricting it, someone who was discouraging you from eating or commenting on what you were eating. So that blends into the next one, negative cultural consequences of eating freely. So this one I think is so influential. This is like you cannot go anywhere and eat anything without someone commenting on it. There is huge cultural consequences for eating freely, both inside people's homes, outside people's homes, in the media. It is just embedded into our system. It has roots in patriarchy and colonization, imperialism, white supremacy. And those can be understood if you look at some of the Nagoski sisters' work, and really lots of resources out there around white supremacy and thinness. Um, and so this is one that most of us have. We could have a medical issue that affects digestion or absorption of nutrients. This is one that could be present through neurodivergence. It could be present related to trauma. We know that a nervous system that's in a defense state is going to disrupt digestion and absorption of nutrients. And a lot of folks who end up having real serious IBS or digestive problems or are just not absorbing their nutrients, it's often has something to do with the nervous system. So it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing, but certainly us neurocomplex folks are often born with tricky digestion stuff, and could be related to sensory stuff, ARFID, all sorts of things. So that's a big one. And then embodied anxiety around eating because of the systematic dehumanization of white supremacy and or so I'll start with that one. So yeah, just sort of the stress of eating that we've inherited from white supremacy in terms of dis disconnecting us from our bodies and telling us that like our desire around eating is somehow impacts our purity, our goodness, our morality. There's so much morality around food, eating food, and how that food relates to your body shape and size. And so that's just a huge one that we have inherited in this country. And that one has, it's what these are like collective burdens that we've inherited, primary, especially in places like the US. And then this last one that they list a neurobiologically driven terror around food triggered by energy deficits. This is just like every animal has this one. This is just evolution, uh, you know, keeps the species alive by prioritizing those things that are going to keep us surviving, and food is one of them. And so there is just a neurobiological, evolution based fear of not having enough food because we would die without it. So that one is present for everyone. So what I love about this paragraph is that it just breaks it down so simply. When there is, um, any of these things happening with food, the brain and the body are like, there's a problem with my food situation. Something's wrong with my food situation. And this, when this gets sent from the nervous system up to the brain does all sorts of creative things to try to deal with this, right? So we create parts when we have some sort of danger. And if we're itty bitty, and we have this thought come up, there's a problem with my food situation, we may do all sorts of things. We may refuse to eat, we may eat more, we may hide our food, we may control our food, we may look to others to tell us what to eat. And these are all just beautiful ways for our system to try to survive this problem with the food situation, right? It's not a moral thing, it's not a character thing, it's not something you decided cognitively to do. Um, it which path your parts take could be influenced by your own personal life experiences, your genetics. And again, it could come out in so many different ways. A part could decide to avoid food, to fixate on food, to eat more food, to do mental calculations constantly about food, do more exercise, do forced vomiting, right? All sorts of ways that our parts in their innocence, in their really well intentioned, um, wanting to love and protect us ways that they can come up to respond to this cue from the environment or from our epigenetics that says there's a problem with my food situation, right? So they emphasize that when we frame these stressors around food as being maladaptive coping strategies for psychological problems or life stressors, we pathologize them. And they are normal, healthy responses, right? If a little animal is not going to have access to food and they start gathering it up, what do we call them? We call them a wise little squirrel, right? Gathering their acorns. We're not going to call them a hoarder. We're not going to call them a binge eater. We're not going to tell them they have an eating disorder. We're not going to tell them that they've got, self-sabotage or that they've got maladaptive coping strategies, or a psychological problem. We're just going to go, oh, yeah, you know that winter's coming, so you're stocking up. Good thinking, right? Um, and so we want to be really careful, even if we say something like, it makes sense that you turn to food to manage your emotions. You were being hurt and oppressed, and you have a pathological problem with food, and you need to work on your thoughts and behaviors. It's very similar to saying to someone like who has, like me, who had a ton of distress around not being accepted as a queer person. And then I was told I had, bipolar and that I needed to take medication. It was like, no, I think I need someone to tell me that it's okay to be queer, you know? And I need my environment to change. And I need my self talk and my self views to change. And I am depressed and freaked out because this is depressing and freaky. You know, this is not a pathology. This is a matches the situation. So when people have distress around eating, they are responding just as they should. Um, a, a distressing or unsafe, you know, relationship with food, um, that you've either fallen into unintentionally because of your environment or that's been directly pushed upon you, that is distressing and deserves to have a stressed out response, right? So when we blame people as like your thought and behavior patterns with food are your problem, we are victim blaming again and gaslighting because their thought and behavior patterns are not the root of their suffering. Their uh, thought and behavior patterns with food are a symptom of something that was not safe, right? So their thought and behavior patterns are not the problem. Their thought and behavior patterns are a manifestation of this problem. There's a problem with my food, right? I don't have enough. Someone's telling me I can't have it, etc. Um, okay. So this framework of, stress around eating as an active trauma allows us to move away from this kind of focus on the eating behavior as the problem and allows us to expand and recognize everyone who suffers, around eating, not just the people who fit these certain, narrow diagnostic criteria stereotypes. And we can even, bring in these questions like, a therapist will say, just sort of, how was your week? But something that I like to offer is, have there been any changes to your eating, sleeping, digestion, or being able to go to your regularly scheduled activities? Because that's going to help me real quick in a couple of sentences find out there was some real distress this week if something in there happened, changed. If people say, yeah, I was hardly eating, or yeah, I ate way more than typical and I didn't feel good, etc. So, this framework also helps us with treatment, right? Because if you just focus on the behaviors, it's very rare that someone's behaviors are able to shift because we can't just shift the behavior that was solving for a problem because the problem still needs to be solved, right? So we can shift out of that kind of a framework and offer compassion instead of more oppression, like, oh, well, you were told that there was a problem around food, so you came up with this brilliant strategy to support yourself. Now we're going to tell you that the strategy is a psychological problem. It's your fault, right? Um, okay, so this last paragraph just reiterates, we want to look at all of the, trauma lens for all of it. Look at um, every aspect of a person's life and not just their relationship with food and eating. Um, and then this part I really admire and appreciate is like, it's up to the person, right? It's up to them how to tell their story. It's up to them if they want to tell their story. It's up to them if they want to change the behavior that they're interacting with. For some people, the you know, for most people right off the bat, especially if they have active behaviors around stresses around food, that coping strategy is like active and in place, and we do not want to pull the rug out from under them, right? So we're going to understand and support it first before we ever consider changing or removing behaviors, right? It's like if you had four legs to a table and one of them was rotting, you're not going to just take that one out because the whole table would fall down. You're going to put a new one under it as a support, and then when you're ready, you can take it out. But even then, in terms of an IFS perspective, parts work perspective, we're not going to ever get rid of these parts. We're maybe just going to reinforce and support and allow them to not have to lead the way. We're going to have compassion and take care of them. They may be in distress forever and always, but when we become more self-led, we can support those parts that are in distress in a way that they don't have to change. And the behaviors might not be as present at that point because when that little part says, I have a problem with food, something's wrong with food, then we can say, okay, honey, and then we can come and take really good care of them while we bring in self to say, and what are we going to do about eating for today? Right. So, this is a question that um, I really encourage folks to consider if this is something that's hard for you, is not only to understand, support, and listen to with compassion without needing them to change to all of the parts that have the difficult relationship with food, but to also explore, what does self have to say about food? And what does self have to say about me eating? If I ask self, hey, what do you think if I had a snack? And self brings those 8 C's of curiosity, compassion. Um, I'm not going to remember them all right now. All those lovely C's, right? And in that, I hear myself voice just saying, yeah, of course, it's great for you to have a snack. And there might be some curiosity in there of, is there anything else that you want um, in addition to the snack? So it might be asking me, are you actually feeling tired? Are you actually feeling, you want some connection? Are you actually feeling scared that there might not be enough food later? Um, are you feeling like neglected? Are you feeling lonely? Um, do you want some reassurance and loving care? Do you want a snack and a call with a friend? Do you want a snack and a nap? Do you want a snack and an extra therapy session? Or some time with a book that is meaningful to you or a podcast to you? Do you want a snack and some cozy blankets um, and a warm drink, to offer even extra care, sort of like, self is this um, like ideal, unconditional, loving caregiver. And I think of myself when my kiddo wants a snack. I go, oh, how about this? How about this? And I'll make you this, or I'll take you there to get this. And do you want a cozy blanket? Do you want a stuffy? Do you want a story? Do you want a show? Do you want some cuddles? Do you want a nap? Do you want, I'm like offering the snack and um, so yeah, open up to what does self think about eating? What does self think about you eating? What does self think about food? What does self think about your body? All these things. We'll get to know the parts that came up with these brilliant strategies that might not be ones that we really feel connected to anymore. We get to know those parts, and we can also get to know that big ass self, that unconditional love, and what they think about food and eating too. Okay, lots of love.